Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning. So we'll start with revisiting a few things that we had done yesterday. And yesterday we were talking about how to understand our data in terms of different attributes of statistics. So let's quickly go through that. So we saw that earlier we had seen that once we get the data, the life cycle would be that first we try to understand from the domain experts, from the sponsors, from the project manager, that what is the project about, what is the objective, who are the users of the end product. And that is important for us to know because that will define our testing strategy, that will define how do we uh, reach out to them, how do we present the results to them. So presentation would be different if I need to present the findings of my data science project to senior management. That would be different if I need to present it to some external agency. So we need to understand the entire context. Having understood the context, then we start getting data. And data, in all likelihood, would not be available from a single source. And therefore, as we receive data from multiple sources, we need to perform certain functions like data munching, which will be collating the data on the common parameters. An example we took was that if we are getting the employee data, then maybe the basic data is available in our HR system. Then the company might be using the another system for performance appraisal. That data would be there. Maybe there is a different system for payroll. So payroll data could be somewhere else. So you need to collate all this data to uh, to get ready for the further analytics. Having got the data, now we start analyzing the data, that what is that we have got and what format we have got. So uh, information that you will receive from different sources may not be in the same format. In some cases, the same data would be in the numeric form. In some places, it could be in the string form. So all of these things, first we need to collate data, and after that we start analyzing it. And the first step in analysis was to get a general feel of what I have got in the data, and that we see by bring that into a data frame, because pandas is very easy to work with, rather than just working with the Python and the NumPy libraries. Pandas makes it very difficult, very easy to analyze the data in just like an Excel-like a format. So our preference would be to work with pandas. So we bring the data into pandas, then we see what are the columns, what do these columns represent, and then we formulate our questions to understand the columns better. And we have taken the example of the housing price data that we have got. Now, having seen the shape and size of the data, what is the data types, are they numeric, are they string, and then asking for the describe function to show to us what is the min, what is the max, how many records are there. Having done all of these things, that's the first level of analysis. After that, we want to get a deeper understanding of data. And that's where we're saying that to understand a data set, there are two things which are very important. First is that what is the most likely data on each of these features or each of the columns that we have in my data set. And the most likely scenario that is represented by what is called as central tendency. And the three measures are the mean, median, and the mode.
Mean is a simple average. Median is the midpoint of the data. So if you arrange that in the ascending or descending order, the midpoint is called the median. So if you have the number of data elements in your data set in odd numbers, so for example, if you have say 5 data elements, then if you arrange them sequentially, then the third one is the median. But if you have say 6 of them, then you don't have a center as such. So we take 2 of them and then take the average of that. So if you have 6 data elements, then we take the third and fourth. We consider the element 3 and element 4. So there are 2 elements after that and 2 elements before that. So 3 and 4 both become the center, and then we take the average of that. That becomes the median. Mode, we need to know about it, but as we will see that we are not going to use that very frequently. In our data analysis, what would be most important is the median and the mean and the median. Then we also saw the peculiar characteristics of them. That is, the mean is gets influenced by the some numbers which we call as outliers. So, for example, in this data set, what you are seeing on the screen, 100 is very clearly an outlier, and that is affecting the computation of the average. And therefore, as we go into our analysis, and if we are going to use certain parameters which will be using mean, then we need to consider that whether I keep those outlier numbers or do we remove them, because those are disproportionately influencing the computation of the average. But it's not that easy to impact the median, because even if I increase it to 100 or 200, the median actually remains the same. And therefore, in many of the statistics, we will be using, or many of the other data analysis tools, we would be using median. So having understand that where each of the data elements or each of the feature in the data set, and when I say feature, these are all the columns in the uh, housing data set or any other data set that we receive, the columns are called features. So having understood that for each feature, what is the central tendency, or where the what is the most likelihood of data, then we see another um very important aspect of the data is that how data is dispersed. And we took a very common example of how much time do I take to reach office. So even if on an average I take about 30 minutes, not it's not that every day I reach at 30 minutes. Sometimes I'll take less time, sometimes I take more time. That is what in statistics we say, that the mean or the average of the time which I take to reach office is 30 minutes, and the data is dispersed around the average. And when I say dispersed around the average, that means that there is some data on the which is less than average, and there is some data on the right of the average. And if I plot on the screen, then we'll say that there is some data to the left of the mean and there is some data to the right of the mean. Now, after that, we said that okay, having got that data and having known that the data is not really just the average but a dispersion around the average, then we want to measure this dispersion, and one of the easiest one to understand is the range. So if I have been to office for 100 days and I see that the minimum time I took was 20 minutes and the maximum time I took was 1 hour, then my range becomes uh, 60 minutes minus 20 minutes. So 40 minutes is the range in which the data varies, or the range is from 20 minutes to 60 minutes. But to better understand that whether I reach in 60 minutes, or uh, whether I take most of the times do I take 40 minutes, or most of the times do I take 20 minutes, or most of the times do I take 30 minutes, we see that through a histogram. And let's ensure that we understand the histogram properly. So we have drawn the histogram, and the important thing to understand in the histogram is the concept of the bins. So let's try to understand this a bit better, because histogram we'll be using very frequently, and many of the um, especially the graphs of dispersion, it is based around the concept of the histogram. So here I have some data on the left side. Now the histogram, when we say histogram, we have to first define what is the bucket I am choosing. So I have this data between 10 and 20, and I have chosen the bucket of 2. It means that show me how many times the data occur, or what is the frequency of the data elements between 10 and 12. So I have defined a bucket of 2. So it will count that how many times there are how many data elements between 10 and 12. So it counts that there are 7. So the first bar is representing the data between 10 and 12. The second bar is representing data between 12 and 14. So I have 8 different records, or 8 different data elements, where the value is between 12 and 14, and so on and so forth. I draw it. Now I can change the bin, and you will see that, so here, even in Google Sheets, you have this option of histogram. So here I had chosen the bucket size as 2. So we can choose the bucket size of 1, and you see that the histogram changes, where each bar is actually representing one number. So between 10 and 11, between 11 and 12. So all these numbers represent the frequency. So the key thing to remember is that in the histogram, the height of a bar, or height of the vertical bar that histogram has, it shows the frequency, and frequency would be shown on the y-axis, and the value of the data would be shown on the x-axis. So that's how we draw the histogram. Let's go to our Python notebook. So here also we had drawn a histogram. So here the histogram is showing me the count of the values, whatever data set I have, and the data set I have created a data set of random variables of 2000. So this data set is containing 2000 records. And in these 2000 records, there are about 100 records which are very close to 0. It means maybe 0.1, minus 0.1, and so on. And as we move away from the average, which is the 0, then we see that the frequency of those data elements is going on reducing. And normally the data would be like this. That is, you'll have more data around the average, and then as you go away from the average, the frequency of those events start reducing. And if that distribution is completely symmetrical, we call that as a normal distribution. But then the question is that how do we really measure the symmetry of the data? So as we were measuring the dispersion, one thing was just to know the range. And then we want to measure the symmetry of data, that around the mean, how is the data arranged? So there are two ways, or there are two measures that we take. One is that whether it is symmetrically distributed around the mean. It means that the left side of the histogram and the right side of the histogram, are they looking similar? If yes, then we say that skewness is 0. It means that they are symmetrically plotted or distributed around the mean. But in some cases, you will see that there are more data points which is towards the right side of the average. And then we'll call that this data set is skewed to the right. And in those cases, our skewness value would be more than 0. So some of these things you should take down as the frequently asked question. What is skewness? If it is skewed to the right, then my skewness value is going to be more than 0. If it is skewed to the left, my skewness value is going to be less than 0. So every time you may not get the time to plot, or the data set would be so large that it would be difficult to plot, and therefore by seeing these numbers we should be able to create a shape in our mind that how the dispersion is looking like. So one was the symmetricity of the data, and the second was what we call as the peakedness of the data, that how is the most of the data is that just around the center, or how is it actually dispersed. So if there are more of the data around the mean, it means that the frequency of the numbers which is around the mean is very high, and therefore it will be having a sharper peak. And we measure the value of and that sharpness of the peak or the flatness of the uh, tails. So here this part is called the peak, and these left and right side is called the tails. So either the sharpness of the peak or flatness, or the same thing can be shown as the flatness of the tails. So if the peak is less sharp, the tails could be more flat. So that is measured by what we call as kurtosis. So if the kurtosis is 0 and the skewness is 0, then we say that this data is normally distributed. But if the kurtosis could be more than 1, more than 0, so if the kurtosis is positive, more than 0, then it represents that its peaks are sharp, and if the peaks are flat and the tails are fat. So if the tails are fat and tails are so the fats, the tails we describe as if it is fat or light. So if it is thin-tailed or light-tailed, then the more data is likely to be around the peak. So for the fat-tailed distribution, or where the peak is actually also flat, the kurtosis would be less than 0. And then we also saw that if the values of the skewness or kurtosis is uh, beyond 1 or beyond -1, then we say that data is non-normal. It means that it is moving far away from what normal data should look like. And we also then saw that the normal data would look something like this, normal distribution. This kind of data is left skewed, and therefore my skewness number is negative. This kind of data we'll call as the right skewed, and because there is more of the data on the right side of the peak, and therefore the skewness number is positive. Now this kind of data, here the peak is very sharp and the tails are comparatively flat, and therefore here the skewness number is positive. The kurtosis is positive and it's very high, more than 1. And this kind of data set, if you see, this kind represents that it's a fat tails and the flat peaks, and therefore kurtosis is negative. And kurtosis is more than -1. It means that it is really, really flat data set. It means that it is much more equally distributed. And we draw this by now drawing part or the visual depiction. I will go through the code maybe sometime later, but right now our focus is that if this is the kind of data, then how do we analyze that, or how do we describe that kind of data? So whatever we have been doing till now is trying to describe the data on different attributes, and therefore this kind of statistics is called the descriptive statistics. or we are just trying to describe the data. So there are three kinds of things that you will come from. We will come across. The first one is the descriptive analytics, where we are just trying to describe the data. So far, we are just saying that, okay, the data set we have received is like this. So it's just like describing a person. When we describe a person, we say that how tall he or she is, what is the weight, and then we also describe them in terms of relationship. It means that um, the father's name, the place where one lives, or the company where one works. So different relationships or different types of relationships that a person has, we describe them by relationships and by some certain attributes. Similarly, for data, we have seen that we can describe them in certain attributes, and then we, having defined them in terms of, and the two main attributes were the central tendency and measure of dispersion. So having described the data, then we say that now let's go into the relationships. But before that, we also, before we go into the relationship, the other measures which also describe the data and especially cover its dispersion and quantify the dispersion. Three things that we talked about: the variance, covariance, and correlation. We will come to as we go into the relationship part. So other two things which quantify the dispersion was the variance and the covariance. Variance, we said that let's measure the degree of variance. So we take every data elements, we find the distance of that data element from the mean. And since we want to ensure that since some data would be on the negative side and some data on the positive side, and therefore if I just take the distances, it will cancel out. So for example, in the time taken to reach office, if the average is 30, and there would be some data point, say there is one data point at 27 and one data point at 33. So if I measure the distance, one would be -3, the second would be +3. So if I just take a simple sum, it will add to 0, and I will feel like as if there is no dispersion at all, but that would be a wrong measure. So to avoid that problem of the positive and the negative numbers cancelling out, we take a square of that, and then we take a sum. Okay. So we will take the square of 3 and we'll take the square of -3 both. So I will say that now my variance is 3 plus 3, which is 9 plus 9, which is 18. And since there are two numbers, if I want to find out the average variance, so variance would represent the average variance, we will divide that by 2. If it is a population, we'll divide that by 1 if it is a sample. Okay. And if you take the square root of that, that is called the standard deviation. So these variance and standard deviation actually quantify my, how data is dispersed around the mean. So we will have the mean and we will have the variance or the standard deviation. More commonly used would be the standard deviation. And these two numbers are the key to representing a data. So if I give you the mean and the standard deviation, then I have a very fair idea of how the data is distributed, because most of the data would be normally distributed. And if I have a normal distribution and if I know the mean, if I know the standard deviation, then it gives me a fair idea of that how much data is at what distance from the mean. So if it is normally distributed, we saw that about 68% of the data would be between plus and minus 1 standard deviation. 90.5% of the data would be plus and minus 2 standard deviation. So when we say plus and minus 2 standard deviation, we need to compute what is called the z-score. So z-score is nothing but representing the distance from the mean in terms of a standard deviation, which is nothing but the average minus the data point and divide that by the standard deviation. So we get the z-score. So once I have the z-score, then I can tell you with fair degree of confidence that how much of the data is more than that and how much is less than that. So in the case of the how much time do I take to reach office, and if my standard deviation is say 5 minutes, so now I can define, or now I can find out the likelihood that I will reach office in say less than 23 minutes. So how do I do that? I take the distance between the average and the data point. So my data point is 23, my average is 30. So the distance is minus 7. I'll divide minus 7 by 5, which is my standard deviation. So my Z score becomes 1.2. Now we are saying that what is the probability that I'll reach office in less than 23 minutes? In that case, now my Z score is 1.2. So I go on to the normal distribution. I look at where that 1.2 is. So is we'll see that roughly around here is 1.2. And then we see that maybe if we come to this table, it shows the area covered before 1.2. So maybe roughly about 10% of the time. So if you see 1.2 would be here, and that represents minus 1.2, and that represents something around that. So maybe cumulative percentage, we will take about 10% of the times I will be reaching the office in less than 23 minutes. Similarly, if I want to find out that what is the probability that I will reach office in less than 40 minutes. So 40, my distance from the mean is 40 minus 30, that is 10. I'll divide 10 by the standard deviation, which is 5. So my Z score becomes 2. So I come and look for this 2, and we see that about 98% of the times I will actually reach office before 40 minutes. So these are the kind of analysis we can do if I have the uh, data available about what is the median and what is the standard deviation. And that's the beauty of the statistics, that once you understand the nature of distribution, once we understand once we get the some quantified measures of dispersion and central tendency, then we can do wonders with that data. We can, without going into each and every data element, we can make some prediction, just as we were trying to do the prediction about how much time, how many times will I reach office in less than 23 minutes, how much time in less than 40 minutes, and we can do all kinds of analysis, that what is the probability that I will reach office in more than or less than 35 minutes, 30 minutes, and so on. Okay. And but to be able to apply that, we need to understand that whether my data is really having a normal distribution or not, and that's where the skewness and the kurtosis comes in. So if the skewness and kurtosis is more than 1, then we'll say that okay, let's not apply these Z score and derive the conclusions, because my data itself is not normally distributed. So if the data shape is something like this, and we see that this is highly skewed to the right, and therefore my skewness value is more than 1, then I should not really resort to computation of the Z score and the values that we derive at. And there would be a different table or different ways to derive at, because based on the skewness, we can still arrive at the number, but not from the normal distribution. That's what we had covered yesterday. I thought that we'll spend some time in revisiting that, because as I was saying that in the first go, it may be a bit overwhelming to understand or to recall most of these things. But to summarize, once I get the data, we draw a histogram. That histogram shows me the shape of the data. That histogram also shows me what is the center of the data, and the center of the data, or the central tendency of the data. 3 measures we have seen. After we have drawn the histogram, then we get the shape of the data and the dispersion of data around the average, and the measures of the dispersion The key measures of dispersion are range, kurtosis, skewness, and then standard deviation, variance. We have gone through the computation of the variance and the standard deviation. We have seen that if my data is normally distributed, it means that they are absolutely symmetrical around the mean. Then with the z-score, we can compute that what is the likelihood of an event happening. And z-score plays a very important role. So on the table, we also saw that what is the area covered uh, between plus minus 1 standard deviation, or less than 1 or 2 or 1.2 or 1.3 z-score, and based on that we can see that what is the likelihood of an event happening. Now, having done that, now we have described our data in terms of attributes. Now we will try to describe our data in terms of relationships. That is, the different attributes or different features that we have got in data, how are they correlated? And one of the measures of that is the covariance or the correlation. And we also saw yesterday briefly and that we can compute the correlation in the same fashion as we compute, or in a similar fashion as we compute the variance. So when we are saying correlation, it means that we are trying to find out the relationship between two different data sets. So my first data set is this one, my second data set is this one. And as we discussed yesterday, that now we are trying to see the relationship, and that relationship in terms of data is that if the whatever is the movement in data X is the same pattern being followed when I see data Y, or are they moving in opposite direction? To find out, we compute again the distance between the two, we multiply that, and then the process is the same. So rather than multiplying the distance by itself, when we multiply the number by itself, it becomes the square. So when we are calculating the variance, we are multiplying this distance by itself. When we are computing the covariance, we are multiplying the distance of these two data sets with each other. And then we find, that is what I have shown here, column B and column F. So column B is the distance from the average for the respective elements in data set 1, and this one is in data set 2. We multiply that with each other, and then we find the total. We divide that by n minus 1, and then we take the square root of that. So if we are analyzing the just one feature or just one data element, we call that as variance. If we are finding out the relationship between two different data elements, we call that as covariance. So the counterpart of the variance will be covariance, and the counterpart of the standard deviation is correlation coefficient. So here the full name of this one will be correlation coefficient. So the correlation coefficient will actually vary between -1 and 1. That's the value that correlation coefficient will always take, between -1 and +1. If it is -1, it means that it is perfectly correlated. So if the data value is closer to 0, it means that there is no correlation, and as it moves away from 0, it means that there is a higher correlation. But the correlation could be in the positive direction, the correlation could be in the negative direction. So if my value is closer to -1, it means that they are perfectly correlated, but they move in opposite side. It means that if X goes up by 1%, Y will go down by 1%. And if it is +1, it means that they are perfectly correlated, and the direction of the correlation is positive. It means that both of them rise or fall or increase or decrease together. So that was the concept of the covariance and the square root of the covariance. So as we measure the dispersion in terms of the variance and standard deviation, when we see the relationship between two different data elements or two different data series or two different features, uh, then we see it in terms of the covariance and correlation. So covariance is computed as we saw, that we take the x bar which is being shown here that represents the average. So we take the x data series, we see the difference between the average and the individual data points. Then we take the y series of data, we take the average of y, which is represented here by y bar, and then the data element, which is the individual data element, that is y. Then we multiply that with each other. Then we take the sum of that, and then we divide that by n minus 1, because for the sample, and n if it is if I have the data about the entire population. That is, so that's how I get the covariance. And if we divide the covariance, so sorry, I was wrong there. We were not taking a square root of that. We are dividing the covariance which I achieve by the standard deviation of data x multiplied by standard deviation of data set y. So my mistake, when we come here, the covariance part, sorry, I was showing you here in the Excel sheet. So covariance is not really the square root of this data as we do in the terms of when we compute the standard deviation from the variance. I take the square root of the variance, and then I find the standard deviation. In this case, after I have got the covariance, we divide this by, so here, sorry, just let me see. So we got the sum, then we divide that by n minus 1. Yeah, then if you see, I am dividing this by G16 and C16, which is the standard deviation of the data set X and the standard deviation of the data set Y. The correlation coefficient I get after I so correlation coefficient, after I have computed the covariance, I divide that by the multiplied value of the standard deviation, or the product of the standard deviation of x and the sigma of y. So sigma is the number that we normally use to represent the standard deviation. That's how we get the correlation coefficient. And we know now how to interpret the correlation coefficient number. Now, at some places, or you may have asked the question that the main purpose that we were trying to square the difference between the mean and the data element so that it does not really cancel out. So rather than taking a square, we could also have taken absolute value. So absolute value of -3 would be 3, absolute value of 3 also would be 3. In the previous example that we had taken, the time taken to reach the office, 27 minutes, the average was 30 minutes, and the two data points we were analyzing was 27 minutes and 30 minutes. So rather than taking the square, we could have also taken the absolute value. That is both of these numbers, 3 and 3, and then we take the sum of that. So that is also one of the measures that is being used. But the most widely used one is the standard deviation. But if we just take the absolute value, that measure would be called is the mean absolute deviation, which is we just take the absolute value of that, we sum that, we divide that by n or n minus 1. That's it. Because here then there is no concept of taking a square root, because we were not doing the square in the first place. So that would be a simple way to find out the dispersion. But the most frequently used would be the standard deviation. This one would be used in very few places, but we just need to know it. Then we also saw and how to draw the data as a box plot and how to interpret the box plot. Before we interpret the box plot, we need to understand what is a quartile and what is the interquartile range. And just to revisit that again, if we divide our data into four parts, then I have the min and the max, and then I divide data into four parts. For so we see the 25 percentile, we see the 50 percentile, we see the 75 percentile, and from 0 to 25 percentile is called the first quartile, second quartile, third quartile, and the fourth quartile. So if we take the value of the third quartile, which is the 75 percentile, minus the value at 25 percentile, I get the interquartile range. And then what I want to see is that how much of the data is actually lying far away, but now measured in terms of interquartile range. So we draw a box plot where there would be a box drawn here. The midpoint of the box represents the median, or the 50 percentile, and the two ends of the boxes, they represent Q1 and Q3. So that is the box. Then we take the interquartile range and we take a factor of multiplication. Normally 1.5 is the standard that we take, but you have the freedom to take 2 or 1.25 or any other number. So we take the interquartile range, and then we say that we want to find out how much of the data is actually lying 1.5 times beyond the interquartile range. So we take the interquartile range IQR into 1.5. We add that to Q3. Similarly, we deduct that from Q1, and that's where these are called the whiskers. So that's where the whiskers would be drawn in the box plot. And then whatever is the data point which is lying beyond that would be shown as these small dots or small circles. So that gives me a feel of how much of the data is actually far away, and are there too many data elements which are actually far away out of the whiskers of the box plot. And that also we had done in our data set here. In the box plot we had drawn earlier itself. Yeah. So here you are seeing that once the box plot is drawn for this median house value, there are a good number of data elements which are actually lying outside this upper end. So that gives me some feeling that yes, I have a lot of data which is lying outside the 1.5 times the IQR, and therefore there could possibly be an outlier data. So at this point of time, with the box plot, with the interquartile range, we are just trying to describe the data. We're just saying that yes, there are so many, there looks like that there are so many outliers. We are not suggesting any action based on whatever our finding is here. So we're talking about the descriptive parts of the box plot or the IQR. It just describes the data and says that there are so many data points which are lying beyond the interquartile range, or 1.5 times beyond the interquartile range. Or there could be some data elements even below this in some cases. So we're just trying to describe the data. The action will follow after we take a considered view of what do we do with them. Okay. So descriptive analytics is one part of it. Then we will go into what is called is the predictive analytics. That is what is likely to happen. And then there would be third type of things that you as data analyst would be supposed to do is what is called as the prescriptive analytics. It means that first we describe, then we predict. And once the prediction has been done, so for example, if you're talking about, say, prediction of the sale next quarter for different items that a company sells. So first we'll analyze the past data and we'll describe that, okay, this is the data which I have got, these are the attributes. Then by using certain techniques which we have not yet discussed, and mainly using the machine learning techniques, we'll make the predictions. Now, if you make the prediction and say that, okay, the likelihood of sale is that, uh, you are going to increase the sale by 5%. So based on the past data, I am making the prediction. Now, the next thing that the sales head is going to ask you that, okay, you, what do I need to do if the sales need to increase by 10%? Then by again going into your in our tools, you will see that, okay, if you increase the promotion or if you increase the spending on the advertisement, or if you do some promotion at the point of sale in the shops, then your um, sales can increase to 10%. So what are the variables which I will tweak, which will give me a different result? That will become my prescriptive analytics. It means that by analyzing the data, now I can say that what needs to be changed to bring about a desired result. So that would be prescriptive. So three things you should remember: descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. So right now our focus is on descriptive uh, statistics. We are just trying to understand the data. So we'll come to this data set again. So what we have until now, we have tried to describe the data from different perspectives: skewness, kurtosis, standard deviation, variance. Now we come to defining the relation and we'll see the covariance. So covariance is important to understand because we also want to know that whatever data I have got, what is the covariance between them? Are they representing very, very different things, or they represent the same thing? So earlier we had drawn the pair plot, or the what is called as the pair plot. It means that you draw the data of the two of the features in one diagram. So here on one axis, I will have, say, latitude. Another axis, I have the longitude. So rather than drawing it pair by pair, we have a pair plot function in our Seaborn library. So I have, just as we have the matplotlib, there is another library for doing the visual representation that is called the Seaborn. So we imported here matplotlib. So as I was mentioning, it's more important for us to know which library contains what kind of features. So matplotlib as well as Seaborn are the two widely used visualization libraries in pandas, or in Python. And pandas also has some inbuilt feature of visualization. So for example, when we drew the histogram, then we had earlier used just the pandas features of hist. So I'll show you here. I think in understanding the data set, we had used the pandas feature. So if you see here, we are saying housing is a data frame, housing.hist. So this one is a pandas feature. So you can draw these using pandas. You can draw it using just matplotlib. You can draw it using certain inbuilt features of SNS. Why I am again emphasizing is that the way that Python platform has evolved, that different people have been working on the Python platform and they have enriched that by their own libraries. And therefore, you will see that same function actually can be performed by using matplotlib, by using SNS or the Seaborn, by using the inbuilt functions of pandas. And as we go along, you will see that the same function can be performed by using NumPy, by using SciPy. So you should not get confused by that, because we can just import any of them. So if the same function can be performed through different libraries. Don't worry about that. Use those libraries which you are more comfortable with. Even as we go into the machine learning, you will see that there are different libraries called scikit-learn or TensorFlow or PyTorch. So we should be knowing that these functions are available in these libraries, and then whatever function you are more comfortable with, we should use those in our analytics. So here we are using a pair plot function from the Seaborn library, and we have imported Seaborn as SNS, and that's why the name SNS is coming here. So again, we will read this, how to interpret this. So here we are saying that from the SNS library, call the pair plot function, and then we are asking it to make the pair plot from the housing data frame, and there are certain other parameters which you don't need to worry about right now. Even if you don't give, it will draw. So for example, here I have said that marker is plus. If I change that to a dot, then all these data points will be represented as a dot rather than plus. So some of these small things you can go and tweak around, but you don't really need to worry about this now. So here I have given that KDE. If I don't give KDE, if I give a hist or histogram, then these will be depicted as a histogram and not with a smooth line. So if you see here I have drawn this. So KDE actually gives me a smoothing pattern. So if I don't give a KDE here, and I think hist it will take, let's see, then it will just draw a histogram. See, you see here, I changed this to from KDE to hist. So now it's not doing any smoothing. And this one shows that yes, the data set is actually really very flat, and or the tails of this histogram is very fat, and that's why the kurtosis numbers are very high, going beyond -1. So these are some of the tweaks that you can do, but I am not spending time on those things because those you'll gradually learn that how to draw a simple plot and then how to bring about certain enhancements to that. This pair plot function will automatically take all the numeric values in the housing data set and then do a pair plot for each pair. So as we have seen that there are 9 numeric fields here. There was one which was non-numeric, ocean proximity. So you will see that since we have 9, it will draw a 9 by 9 plot. It means that it will show me the relationship between each data element with every other data element in my data set. The first one is drawing the longitude versus longitude, and that's why it is just the relationship by itself. It means that it will just draw a histogram. This one is showing the relationship between longitude and latitude. Now, if you see this data, and if you remember the map of the state of California, it's very much similar because the data we have got is from California. So the housing data set we are using is from the state of California. And it has given me the data points of the longitude and the latitude. So as I plot that, I get roughly the map of California here. Similarly, it shows me here the this plot is the relationship between the longitude and housing mean age and so on. So all of these may not be very relevant, but just to say here that one way to see the relationship between the different data elements or different features we have is by drawing a pair plot. It means that on one axis, I draw longitude. On the second axis, I take the value of the latitude. So some of the significant things that we notice here is that if the data set is at a 45-degree angle, it means that there is a very high correlation. Why? Because this one is the correlation between total rooms and total bedrooms, and this we have seen earlier also. It means that if the total bedrooms are increasing, the total rooms are also increasing almost in the same proportion. So we draw the pair plot, and then the analysis of the high correlation, we were saying that the implication of that is that do I really use both of these, or can I do with just one? That would be the interpretation. But for the visual depiction of all the data elements that we have got, can be done by a pair plot. Now, pair plot has its own limitation because actually the kind of data set that you would normally deal with will have thousands of features or thousands of columns, and you can't really draw and analyze a 1,000 by 1,000 combination and try to find out what we should be doing. And therefore visualization, as you will see that since as a data scientist you will be using a very large set of data, visualization will have its own importance, but visualization also has its own limitations. So here we have just 9 different data elements. So it becomes 9 by 9. It means that 81 pair plots has been drawn here. If you have say 1,000 by 1,000, obviously you can't be looking into 1 million different charts and trying to analyze that. And that's where we need to resort onto the statistical methods. And that would be found by computing correlation. So correlation in the same way that we had done earlier. So you will get the numbers, and that is done by a simple function. So here we say that call the housing data set, and on that you apply the correlation function, and then we store that to a variable called core underscore or correlation underscore housing, and then we are seeing that data. So this one is a data frame. Here we have just applied some representation tools so that it takes a cool warm heat map. Wherever the data is about 1, it will show in red, and the degree of that would be deeper red or deeper blue. That is what this background gradient is doing. And since the numbers are presented in 7 or 8 different decimals, I'm just, for the sake of an easier viewing, I am putting the precision as 2. Now here also you will have the same problem, that if you have say 1,000 by 1,000 different elements, this table will be 1,000 by 1,000. But we have the ways to filter that out. We can always we can filter that by show me all the values which are say more than 0.8 or more than 0.9. So those things we can filter out now from the data frame, and we can depict this. Another way to, now having got this data, so either we can see these numbers in the data frame itself, or we can plot it, what is called as the plotting a heat map. So here also from the Seaborn library we can call the heat map function, and the correlation data which we have stored into the variable correlation housing, we'll say that draw the heat map on correlation housing data. Right now, forget about the other things. Even if you don't give, it will draw. So I have used a few things just for beautification, but that's not really a must at this point of time. As we go into data visualization, we'll see that how a graph can be represented much better. But the heat map can be drawn just by passing the correlation on whichever data set you want to draw a heat map of, that needs to be passed. So I call the Seaborn library, I call the heat map function, and then I pass the data, and then it draws a heat map. Again, here also, if all these diagonal ones, C is 1 because it is representing the correlation with itself. So longitude with longitude, obviously that would be 1. Latitude with latitude would be 1. So all these diagonals are bound to be 1 when we are drawing a heat map of the correlation factors. But where our attention should go is the deep blue and the deep red. So deep blue means that there is a negative correlation, and deep red is showing a very positive correlation. So let's focus now on those things which are deeper in red. What are these things? Total bedrooms with total bedroom is actually 1. So 0.93 is total rooms with total bedrooms. 0.86 is total rooms versus the population. Obviously, you know, this data was for a district, and therefore the more the population you have, more the bedrooms you have. So now we have got a fair idea about what is the correlation between different features that we have got in my housing data set. I think there were some questions which I missed out earlier. Okay. So there were some questions which I missed out earlier. There was one question from Hemant that distance is less than 7 means -7. Yeah, so uh, what the distance we find out by data element minus the mean. So if it is less than the average, it will be in negative number. If it is more than the average, it will be in the positive number. In histogram, okay. The next question was, please repeat the whiskers. So in the box plot, the box has 3 different lines. The line in the middle is the median. The line above that is the Q3. The line below that is Q1. Now we find out the interquartile range, that is Q3 minus Q1. That becomes the interquartile range. We multiply that range by normally by 1.5. Then we add that to the Q3 number. And whatever that value is, that is where we draw the upper whisker. Then we take the interquartile range, multiply that by 1.5 and deduct that from the Q1 number, and that becomes my lower whisker. That's how we draw the whisker. So if there are certain data points beyond these 2 whiskers, it means that there are data points which are lying beyond 1.5 times the IQR on the upper side and on the lower side. That's what the whisker was. Now another question is that on the heat map. So what we are drawing in the heat map here is that the correlation numbers what I have got. So if you see the correlation matrix, it is showing me the correlation with each feature which I have with every other feature which I have in my data set. So in the housing data set, we have seen that the numbers I have, the data which I have is about longitude, latitude, age of the house, rooms in the house, bedrooms in the house, and so on. So it is first computing the correlation between each of these data elements. Now, some of these from the common sense perspective will be absolutely useless. So for example, why should I find a correlation between longitude of the house and the population? I mean, some of these things would be useless from the common sense perspective, but the system is computing it. Will not give any significance to those things. So even if there is a very high correlation between the longitude and the population, I mean, for my analysis of the housing price, it's not really very significant. But when I am giving a single command to compute all the correlations, the system will just do it. Now, in the statistics, one of the things which is very important to understand is the difference between the correlation and the causation. It means that two things may be very highly correlated, but there may not be a cause and effect relationship between the two. It means that just because two things are happening together, that doesn't mean that one is happening because of the other. Okay, so correlation just show you that these two things are happening together. So if the correlation is very high, then we'll say that okay, they move together, but that does not always mean that they are actually happening because of one another. Okay, so suppose that you see that the there is a very high correlation between the temperature and the electricity bill that you get. So on the face of it, they look very different things. One is giving me a measurement of weather. Another one is the uh, you know how much is my monthly expenditure. So the correlation will tell you that okay, these two data elements, I am finding a correlation. Now it is for you to interpret, and you will find that yes, there is a correlation because as the temperature goes up, I use more of the air conditioner or my fan runs 24 hours in a day, and therefore I consume more energy. And therefore, even though the two data elements may look very different or unrelated, at least the data is able to tell you that both of them have a higher correlation. Whether they have a cause and effect relationship, whether one is causing the other, is what we need to interpret. That the system will not tell you, or that the data analytics may not really tell you. But there could be two other things which is which might be having a correlation, but it may not be having impact on the. It may not be really connected because of cause and effect relationship. So, for example, if your electricity bill and if your electricity bill in your uh, house and the no, somebody came out with this very good but a very weird example, and he said that okay, now I have analyzed that how many times Nehru visited UK and the percentage increase in population, and it shows a very high correlation. But obviously, the visit of Nehru is not the cause of increase of population in England. So, but sometimes, so you may have a very good correlation, but there is no cause and effect relationship. On the other hand, you will see that the uh, rainfall in India and the coffee prices in Brazil, they are highly correlated. And why does that happen? Because these two are very, I mean, on the face of it, there is hardly any correlation between the coffee prices in Brazil and rainfall in India. But after analysis, people found out that higher rainfall actually leads to a lower coffee production in India. I mean, yeah. So as the coffee production in India goes down, and India being one of the major producers of coffee, the supply of coffee decreases, and therefore the price of coffee goes up worldwide and in Brazil also. So this correlation is a very good measure because system will tell you that okay, these two things are very highly correlated. Now we will go and see that whether I should delve deeper into it, whether there could be a cause and effect relationship or not. So in the data set, if you find that there is a very high correlation between say longitude and latitude, that is actually of no use to me. I mean, how is that? So relationship, if you see between longitude and the latitude, it is showing 0.92. But that is not something that we need to really worry about. So the heat map is we are putting these numbers, and since these numbers are very large, suppose I don't put a heat map here, I will show you that how these numbers would look like. And then you would understand that why heat map really helps you. So you have the same thing coming like this. Now it becomes very difficult for me in on the eyes. It's not as simple that what is the purpose here? I want to find out those pairs where the correlation is very high or very low. It means close to zero and or close to one or close to -1. In this one, it is the same data being represented, but I will find it very difficult to find out where the correlation numbers are high. But if I see it with the heat map, The heat map is putting the red and blue, and the intensity of the red and blue is being determined by the value of the number in that particular cell. So if it is 1, then it is deep red, and as it moves away from 1, it becomes lighter red. You can see that 0.69 has a lighter shade, 0.86 is deeper than that, 0.93 is even more deep. Similarly, when we go to the negative number, all the negative numbers are being drawn in blue, but if they are close to -1, they are deep blue, and if they are far from -1, it is, you can see that the values of 0.12 is actually lighter blue, and so on. So the heat map serves the function that it helps me bring the focus or attention very quickly. So is that clear, Rishabh? Why do we draw the heat map? It's mainly a tool to attract our attention quickly so that we are focused on those things that we want to analyze. So these are the ways to clear the to draw the heat map. I can just take the data frame and put a background on that one, or I can draw a chart which looks much more beautiful. And as I was saying, that one of the key things that a data scientist needs to do well is data visualization. So heat map is one of the key types of data visualization that you would be doing. So we have seen how to draw the visualization through histogram. We have seen how to do the visualization through a pair plot. We have seen a few tweaks that we can do on the histogram. Either I can see uh, in the vertical bars alone, or we can put certain rounding features. So by changing this hist to KDE, KDE is a function which gives smoothing. So if I draw it, it gets all the data set gets smoothened out. So it gives you a smooth feel of the data. So we have seen how to draw a histogram as a just as a vertical bar. How do we do the smoothing? Then we have seen the pair plot. So simultaneously, we are also covering a few things from the data visualization. As I had mentioned, that it's easier to understand and work with things in a meshed fashion. It means that while we are discussing correlation, we are also discussing a few things on data visualization. So I feel that learning becomes faster and easier rather than trying to have one session just on data visualization and one session just on the correlation. We are handling a lot of things together. So one way is that I draw a pair plot, then I am able to see the correlation. But as I was mentioning, that when we start dealing with the large data sets, these things will have their own limitation. It becomes very difficult to visualize, say, 1,000 by 1,000 data set. We will not be doing a pair plot for 1,000 by 1,000 data set. But those things I can still compute and see the numbers, and that's where the heat map becomes important. So heat map I can see very simply on my data frame itself, or I could draw a heat map using the Seaborn function of heat map. Okay. Now, if there is, say, 1,000 by 1,000 data set that you have got, obviously even drawing in a heat map would be extremely difficult for you. But we can now see it for a data of relationship of one data element with every other. So we can figure out that one. We can take out just the from the correlation housing. If I just take out the median house value, then it shows me the correlation of the median house value with latitude, with longitude, and all these values are being shown here. So now we have earlier used the filtering function. Now by using the filtering, I can always find out that show me those data elements which are higher than a given value or lower than a given value, and that's how we can take out those data elements which is less than or higher than a given value. Now, having described that data, today let's delve into some of what is called as the data munging and data wrangling function. It means that having understood this data, now we will see that is there a possibility of refining this data, that by changing certain things, can I make the data set more meaningful so that my analytics, so that my prediction becomes more accurate. And we will take some examples. Some of these would be qualitative in nature, and some of these things would be quantitative in nature. So the first thing was that I had certain data which is categorical and which is represented in the string format. So ocean proximity was one such thing. Let's see what the data in the ocean proximity was. So if you just see the data of ocean proximity, and you see this was showing me the near bay or near ocean or things like that, isn't it? And we saw these values by seeing and by taking the value counts, it shows me that there are actually 5 types of records which I have: ocean, inland, near ocean, near bay, and island. And we'll also discuss that in all our uh, machine learning algorithms, they expect a numeric data, and therefore if I just pass it like that, it will not be able to process. So we need to convert this into a numeric data. So one way to convert this into numeric data is what is called is the label encoding. So all these labels that we have, and labels are the inland, near ocean, near bay, we'll convert these into numbers. So again, we'll rely on certain libraries, and here I will show you 2 ways of doing it. I can use the inbuilt function in pandas, and we can also use the features which is available in our sklearn library. So sklearn is the main library that we will be using for machine learning, but we can use a certain function from the sklearn library also. And again, to emphasize that we should be knowing that the same function would be available in different libraries, and the reason of that is that the Python platform has been, several people or several groups have contributed to the Python platform, and therefore the same function has been developed by several units or several groups, and they have developed those features independently. So all of that is becoming available to us as a user of the Python platform, and it's for us to choose that which one you are more comfortable with, which one you want to use. So I'll demonstrate to you that how do we replace these by numbers or by numeric values by using the pandas function. So we call the housing data frame, we select the feature or the field or the column on which I want to convert these labels into numbers, and then we say this is all the call the categorical function. It means that all this data we call as the categorical data because it will take only certain values, and then put codes for that. Okay. And that data, that is these codes, I am asking it to put into a new column, which is the ocean proximity code. This column was not there earlier. We saw that. So what this command is meaning is that call the housing data frame, call the ocean proximity column of the housing data frame, and then convert that into categorical data type, and then put the codes for that. So if we run this command, what happened here. Just to be on the safer side, let me run all the commands before. Maybe I didn't convert this into category earlier, and that's what is giving me the error. So we'll just, okay. Now the same thing, so by the time it runs, I'll explain to you the next part. Now the same thing we can do. Okay, so I think first I need to convert this into hashtag this category, and then it should run. Just 1 minute. Ocean proximity is not, okay. So ocean proximity, actually maybe we have removed that earlier. Did we drop ocean proximity somewhere? Okay, we'll just import the so I'm getting this data set once again. Now it should work. Yeah. So here is first I'm converting this into the ocean proximity as a categorical type, and then I am applying the code on that. So you see here, now the system has automatically assigned a code for each of these numbers. So it is giving a code 3 for near bay, it is giving a code 1 for inland, and similarly for the 5 different types that we had, it has assigned some different codes. So that's one way that we can put a numeric code for each of these string values that we have. Now, having given the code, if we want to, we can afford to remove this ocean proximity column, and that can be done by, we can say housing.drop, and then we can drop the, so we are dropping the ocean proximity code here because I also want to show you how to do the same thing from, so I have dropped it, and then we'll do the same function through sklearn. So again, we need to know that which libraries that we need to recall. So from sklearn.preprocessing, we import a label encoder function. Then we are initializing that function. So if I say label encoder is a function, and therefore I am creating an object out of that. So label encoder becomes an object. Now we will call a function from that object. So encoder is the label encoder. I have given the name for the label encoder function, label encoder object, and this also you will have to get familiar with, because in many cases what we do is that first we call a class, that is the label encoder. We create an object out of that. So this label encoder is a class. We'll create an object of that by calling that class, and then we will call different function of that class. So we have not really gone into the class as yet. So for some of you, it may be a bit difficult, but we'll cover the class function in the next session. But for the time being, you can say that I am calling the label encoder class, which I have imported. I create an object out of that, and then from that object, I call the function. So fit transform is a function, and then I pass the ocean proximity column of housing, and then I am giving it a name of the ocean SK level, and then we are seeing that again there is ocean SK level. Just let me reduce it a bit. So here you see here that here also it has given the codes. So ocean SK level. Now I have got the codes for each of these data sets. But one problem which arises is that if we are giving a number, then for any algorithm that we are going to use, these numbers are treated as a, if the code is given as 3, then the system starts giving it a higher weightage because 3 is actually higher than 1, or 3 is, a bigger number compared to 1. And that is a problem here, because the system is assigning random, or system is giving some values, not just the random values. We can actually control, and we can say that which near bay could be given 1 and inland could be given 3. We can control those things. That's not a problem. But there is no hierarchy here. There are some houses at near bay and there are some houses at inland. So whenever we have this kind of thing, we need to see that whether that data represents a hierarchy, or is that just representing certain names. And based on that, these categorical data is called a nominal data if it is representing just the names, or it could be what we call as the ordinal data, which represents some order. Now we may get some data which has some order. So for example, if I have data about my customer, or say data about my products, or the feedback which has been given by the customer, it could be given here as excellent, good, very good, very bad, bad, and pathetic, or some sort of. So even if we have the non-numeric data here, there is a hierarchy there. So excellent is better than very good is better than good. So even though in that kind of data I have a hierarchy, and therefore I can represent excellent by say 7, very good by 6, good by 5. So these numbers actually represent the inherent hierarchy in the non-numeric data we have. On the other hand, I could get the, in this data set, I could get the names of the district, or here the location of the houses. Now these things don't have a hierarchy. So if I have the names of the places here, suppose there is Gachibowli and High Tech City and Kondapur and things like that, there is no hierarchy here, but still I would have to use a number there. And that's where I can't use this kind of labeling. I will have to use what is called as the one hot encoding. It means that there is no hierarchy there. The system should not interpret that as a hierarchy. And how do I handle that? We'll handle that through what is called as the one hot encoding. It means that whatever the number of categories I have got, in this case we had 5 different categories, I'll create a column for each category, and then whatever was the column applicable, I'll put a number 1, and rest I will put a number 0. So once I show it to you, you will understand it much better. I'll come to the code later. Let's see what has happened now. It has become a bit smaller for me to show you in the same frame, but I hope you are able to see it. So you see, for each of the values that we had, like ocean or the inland, island, near bay, near ocean. Now each of these, which was a value in the ocean proximity column, now each of these has become a column by itself. Okay. Now, in the first record, my value is near bay. So what the system is doing is that near bay is shown as 1, and rest everything is being shown as 0. Let's say we'll see the last few. So if it is say inland here, let's see the last few records. If it is inland here, then the inland is 1, and rest everything is being put as 0. So ocean is 0, island is 0, near bay is 0, and rest everything is 0. So what one hot encoding does is that it takes all the values which are available in this column and creates a separate column for each value. And then this process is called the one hot encoding, because only one of these will be hot and we represent the hot by 1, and rest everything will be 0. So out of all of these values, there will be only one hot value, and hot value is the value where we put 1. Rest everything will be 0. That's why the process is called one hot encoding. And one hot encoding, the main purpose of that is that I don't want to give a hierarchy to those numbers, and therefore rather than putting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I will put 1 for every data point. But I can't, if I put 1 in the same column, then the system will not be able to distinguish whether it is nearby or inland. And therefore, I create a column for each of these values and put a value of 0 or 1 depending upon which value is applicable. So by seeing the value of 1 in this row, the system would make out that it is actually the house is nearby. Similarly, by seeing one value here in inland, it will understand that this house is an house inland. It means that it's not near the sea or island. So that's what this one hot encoding process is. We'll end with just demonstrating to you how we are doing it. So again, using pandas, we call the function of get dummies. So it means that it will get the dummy values for the ocean proximity column. So we call the data frame housing, the ocean proximity column of housing, and we apply on that get dummies function from the pandas library. So PD is my pandas library, and we store these values into another data frame which we have just given a name of dummies. You could have given a name of X, Y, Z, whatever. Then I have my housing data set. I have got the dummies. I have my housing data frame. I got the dummies data frame. I put them into the same data frame by calling the concat command. So I concatenate the housing and the dummies, and I concatenate by column. Otherwise, if you recall from our earlier discussion, that if you use the concat without defining the axis, it will actually put that, it will concatenate vertically. It means that it will put the data one below the other. So having added the data which I got in dummies as additional columns, now I see what data is there in housing, and this is what we get. Now the same thing could be done using the other types of libraries also, but the easiest one is to work with pandas. So that's where now we are coming into transforming the data that we have. We may not be able to use the data exactly in the manner that we have received. So having the first step is that we got the data. We have tried to understand the data from different perspectives, either by seeing it visually or by seeing it, the different attributes of that. And then now we are trying to see that can I really improve my data so that it becomes easier for the algorithms to process it. And one of the key function is that all the algorithms that we'll use expects a numeric number for processing. So we need to convert all the string data that we have got, or all the categorical data that we have got, we need to convert them into numbers. And there are, before we do that, we need to understand that whether that number represents a hierarchy. That is it an ordinal data, or do these these strings represent a hierarchy? It means that they are just numeric data. Just 1 minute. A few questions. Hemant is asking that may also vary, right? Every time the data won't be correlated. That is, I mean, diagonally it is one completely. Now it may vary. what is the general meaning of ocean scalable and giving values like 3 to them? Okay, so when we are seeing the correlation and the diagonally, it will always be 1, because when we are seeing diagonally, what it is showing is the correlation with itself. So latitude with latitude, so it will always be 1, or the mean housing price with mean housing price. So if you put the same data here, so for example, if we go into our correlation data set, if I just copy this here, you see this becomes 1, because everything is the same, so it becomes a perfect correlation, and that's why all the diagonal numbers will always be 1. So if you see here, the correlation coefficient has become 1. If I put this as let's see, if I put a negative value, then it becomes -1. So the correlation here is completely negative. So just so here, all these diagonal values will always be 1, because they are comparing the data by itself, and when we compare the data by itself, the number would become 1. Okay. The next question is that what is the general meaning of ocean scalable? Okay, so these are the names that we are defining. So when we came here, we gave the name as, okay. So if you see, the ocean scalable is the name that we are giving to the field. Okay. And this could have been ABC, this could have been XYZ. Okay. Okay. So the two, a few things that we understood today is that since our algorithms can't process string values, we need to convert them into numeric. But before we convert them into numeric, we need to analyze that whether they are ordinal data or nominal data. If they're ordinal data, then we can use the label encoding, where numbers would be assigned, but the data will remain in the same column. But if they are not having any hierarchy, then the system will actually start misinterpreting that near bay is 3, which is higher than inland, which will work if we are saying that excellent is 3 and good is 1. So there is a hierarchy, and if the system interprets that excellent is higher than good, then the system is doing the right thing. So we need to understand whether it is nominal or ordinal, and accordingly, either we use label encoding or we do the one-hot encoding. What are the other improvements that we can do on data that we will see, start seeing on Monday? So Monday, I will cover the definition of the classes. So we have worked on function, but since we started using the classes here, we will spend some time on understanding the classes in Python and how to call the functions from inside the classes. And then we'll go into the rest of the data wrangling. That is, how do we improve, or how do we modify the data that we have got so that we get the better results. Any questions on today's session? Yeah, so all session recording links are available on, I have posted the videos on YouTube. So if you search for data science Vinay Kumar, you will get those things. Or I will post those links once again for you. That's also not a problem. And all these notebooks are available in the folder which I had shared. I think If you have the access to the folder, well and good. Otherwise, I will post the link to the folder once again. So all these notebooks. Do you have the access to the folder, Jivna? Just confirm yes or no. Okay. So I'll share the link to the folder also again on the. Are you there on the WhatsApp group or not? Not yet. Okay, so why don't you ask Aditya to add you to the WhatsApp group, and once you're added, then I'll post the links once again so that you have the access. Okay, so if there are no further questions, we will end it today, and then we'll meet again on Monday. Okay, so enjoy the festival over the weekend. Enjoy your weekend, and then we'll meet again on Monday. Thank you.